It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And if you're interested in hearing prior podcasts of the show or to read some of my columns on Penn Live or the Western Journal or the American Thinker, where we talk about some of the important political and legal issues of the day, or to check out some great merchandise we have, you can look at the markscaringishow.com website and take a look. I want to welcome my listeners on WHP 580 AM News Talk Radio and, of course, iHeartRadio. And if you'd like to take a listen to the show at any time of day or night, not just on Saturdays from 1 to 2, you can download the iHeartRadio app on your phone, and you can listen to the show via the modern marvel of modern technology. And you can get updates from the show and participate online via iHeartRadio. And I want to welcome again to our listeners. It's been quite a week in political and legal issues, news issues. That's probably a gross understatement. We have had, oh my goodness, President Trump on Twitter and in ad hoc impromptu press conferences talking about the issue between the president and Ukraine, and we had the whistleblower and the whistleblower complaint. We have these impeachment inquiries, whatever those are, in the House and the relevant House Intelligence Committees. We've got lots of news to get into today. And I want to start with the release of the transcripts of the telephone call between our president and the president of Ukraine, and then talk about Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. She's a Democrat from California, has been in elective office in the Congress for many, many decades now, having a press conference announcing this impeachment inquiry, and we'll get into all of that. But first, my opening statement. Well, the transcripts have been released. We can now read word for word what President Trump said to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on this now famous or infamous, depending upon your political persuasion, telephone call from earlier this summer. And I must say, Trump is right. It was a beautiful call. Trump placed the call to congratulate Zelensky on his party's recent electoral victory in the Ukrainian parliament. The call was a love fest. It looks like a bromance has been struck up here. The two presidents exchanged congratulations, accolades, and compliments to one another, with the Ukrainian president even claiming he won his election because he followed Trump's lead and that Trump is a, quote, great teacher, end quote. Zelensky explained how he ran and won on Trump's Drain the Swamp anti-corruption campaign. And our dear president, of course, ate it all up. He loved hearing all of those accolades and congratulations from his protege, President Zelensky of Ukraine. And after some mutual bashing of Europe, which is, of course, de rigueur for politicians around the world, except maybe those based in Brussels, and par for the course anytime our president talks about U.S. foreign policy, Trump then got down to business. He expressed concern about corruption in Ukraine and referenced the fact that Ukrainian officials interfered in the 2016 presidential election on behalf of Hillary Clinton, and that former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden had the prosecutor who was investigating Biden's son, Hunter, and his company Burisma Holdings, LLC, for corruption, fired. Trump repeatedly asked Zelensky to work with U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr and Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, on those two very important matters. But the interesting thing that is, of course, not being reported by the media or mentioned by Democrats seeking Trump's impeachment is that Zelensky reassured Trump that he was already investigating these matters and even asked Trump to send over any information he had in order to assist the Ukrainians in their investigation. I wonder, would Democrats and the media have our president refuse to cooperate with our ally in its anti-corruption investigation? Is Trump supposed to ignore Zelensky's request that the president help the Ukrainians investigate all of this corruption in their country? That seems a good bit of it seems to emanate from our dear Democratic Party and high-ranking Democratic officials over here in the United States of America. Now, of course, Democrats don't want the U.S. cooperating with the Ukrainian government's investigation into the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton and her campaign, and former Vice President Joe Biden, their leading candidate for the Democratic nomination, to challenge Trump. That's a big reason why Democrats are threatening to impeach Trump for him simply doing his job to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. To provide cover for their efforts to obstruct justice, Democrats have accused the president of various criminal charges. Some claim the president committed the crime of bribery. Well, let's take a look. Did Trump's call constitute a bribe? Now, according to the federal bribery statute, and we reviewed part of this on last week's show, but since it's front and center in the news today, I thought we'd get into it a little bit here, and then we'll talk about Nancy Pelosi's fake impeachment inquiry. But the bribery statute, the federal under the United States Criminal Code, it says whoever directly or indirectly corruptly gives, offers, or promises anything of value to any public official. Now, stop right there. The Ukrainian president is not a public official under the U.S. bribery statute. The statute defines public official as an officer or employee or person acting for or on behalf of the United States. That excludes the Ukrainian president. So there's no offense under that section of the bribery statute. Now, so what about solicitation of a bribe? Did Trump solicit a bribe? Well, the solicitation section of Title 8 of the United States Crimes Code states, being a public official directly or indirectly corruptly demands, seeks, receives, accepts, or agrees to receive or accept anything of value, personally or for any other person or entity, in return for being influenced in the performance of an official act. Now, Ukrainians say there was no demand for them to investigate Joe Biden. The president of Ukraine even had a joint press conference just a couple of days ago with President Trump. Ironically, it was previously scheduled because they were both in New York at the United Nations, and President Zelensky said he was not pressured, he was not pushed, were the words that Zelensky used, to conduct an investigation based upon the instructions of President Trump. Now, so I think it's clear, though, that we can agree that President Trump was asking that the Ukrainians perform this investigation, which, as we've already talked about, they had already been doing. Remember, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he ran on Trump's Drain the Swamp anti-corruption campaign. That was the Zelensky campaign, and Zelensky got into office because the Ukrainian voters believed he was the best candidate to root out corruption in Ukraine. Well, a big part of Ukrainian corruption is the fact that they allowed their the prior Ukrainian president fired their chief prosecutor because Joe Biden told him to. The chief prosecutor was investigating Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden sat on the board of directors of Burisma Holdings, LLC. As such, Hunter Biden is essentially a governor. He is managing Burisma Holdings. He's responsible for the decisions made and the actions taken by Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian natural gas company, which was involved in a corruption probe by the chief prosecutor. And in fact, just as the chief prosecutor was fired at the direction of a U.S. vice president, the chief prosecutor was about to interrogate Hunter Biden. But his father stepped in and had the chief prosecutor fired. Well, heck, there's corruption right there. Zelensky ran on an anti-corruption campaign. And how about the fact that the Ukrainians were involved? Ukrainian oligarchs owned the company that was involved in investigating the Democratic National Committee's server, where allegedly Hillary Clinton's emails were absconded with by the Russians. Well, the Ukrainians were involved. There's a lot of corruption in Ukraine at the direction of Democrats in the United States. We'll talk more about the Trump-Zelensky call after we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we're talking today about the biggest national news story in quite a long time, with the President of the United States having a telephone conversation with the President of Ukraine earlier this summer. The transcripts of that call recently released by the White House in conjunction with requests by the Democrats running the House Intelligence Committee that this alleged whistleblower come to the committee and testify before the committee. We heard the testimony of the acting director of national intelligence. He testified yesterday. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but we are addressing Democratic claims that the president somehow committed a crime during this telephone call. And I'm going through some of the offenses in the United States Criminal Code to explain how the president did not commit any crime or crimes, certainly let alone high crimes or misdemeanors of the level and type required in order to satisfy and substantiate an impeachment of this president. We'll talk a little bit more about the House impeachment inquiry in just a few minutes. Well, for federal bribery cases, they have to have a quid pro quo, a specific intent to receive something of value in exchange for the official act. Because there was no quid pro quo, there was no crime in Trump's request. Trump did not give something in exchange for getting something of value from the Ukrainian president. There was no quid pro quo revealed in that telephone call. And as I say, Trump must have sought a thing of value. An investigation into the Biden family by the Ukrainian government, where there's credible evidence, probable cause that corruption occurred, that's not a thing of value. If asking a foreign country to investigate corruption involving U.S. citizens is a thing of value, then countless U.S. officials would be in jail today. Now, what about extortion? Is what Trump did extortion? Extortion is defined in the United States Criminal Code. Whoever with intent to extort from any person, firm, association, or corporation any thing of value transmits in interstate or foreign commerce any communication containing any threat to injure the property or reputation of the addressee or of another, or any threat to accuse the addressee or any other person of a crime. Did President Trump threaten to accuse the Ukrainian president of committing a crime if the Ukrainian president did not investigate the Biden family? No. Did the president threaten to injure the property or reputation of the Ukrainian president if he refused to investigate the Biden family corruption? No. And even more so, again, a sovereign government investigating corruption in its own country is not a thing of value under the extortion statute or the bribery statute or the campaign finance statute. It's just a bridge too far. A government executing its lawful power to investigate and potentially prosecute crimes. It's just not a thing of value. It's just not. It's not what the U.S. Criminal Code was set up to cover. Now, with regard to extortion, the facts of this case, even our Democratic friends on the House, they are very proficient at twisting the facts, distorting the facts, but it's impossible to twist and distort these facts into making out the crime of extortion. Now, our Democratic friends and the media, of course, are also alleging this is a campaign finance violation. Well, is it? Let's take a look. Under federal election law, it is a crime for a person to solicit a contribution or donation of money or, there it is again, thing of value from a foreign national. The Ukrainian president is obviously a foreign national, but again, investigations are not things of value. Opposition research, like what Hillary Clinton solicited, paid for, and received from a foreign national when she was running for president in 2016, that's considered a thing of value. That's something campaigns do on a regular basis. If you look at every one of these Democratic presidential campaigns right now, from Cory Booker to Kamala Harris to Joe Biden himself, they all have opposition research staff in their campaign. They have people in their campaigns whose job it is to dig for dirt on the other individuals running in the Democratic primary. On their Kamala Harris has opposition research going on. Trust me, right now on Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has oppo research going on right now on Joe Biden, although that's not a very difficult thing to do. It's so easy to point out Joe Biden's flaws. So opposition research is a regular part of presidential campaigns and lots of campaigns. So if you, as a U.S. citizen, contact a Ukrainian or a former British spy like Christopher Steele, and you hire that person to dig up dirt, do opposition research, well, that's a thing of value. And U.S. election law does not allow you, it prohibits you from using foreign nationals to do your oppo research. Notwithstanding the fact that Hillary Clinton did, but, she's a Democrat, so she's absolved of any criminal wrongdoing. Again, a foreign government investigating credible allegations of corruption in its country is just not a thing of value under the campaign finance and election law. Prosecutors are doing their jobs investigating allegations of corruption within their own jurisdiction. It cannot possibly come under this definition. And as we've talked about before, if that were the case, so if any political if a government conducting an investigation into allegations of corruption were a thing of value under campaign finance election laws or under the bribery or extortion statutes, then every single candidate running against Donald Trump essentially gets a get-out-of-jail-free card. Donald Trump, under the Constitution, he is the chief executive of the executive branch. The executive branch is responsible for federal law enforcement in the United States. Article 2 of the Constitution imposes a duty upon the president to take care that the laws are carried out, are faithfully executed. And I know our Democratic friends, now that we have a Republican president, they seem to think that the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice and the United States Attorney General, the director of the FBI, are somehow detached and separate and independent from the president. That is completely false. It's absolutely not true. There is no Department of Justice without the president. There is no FBI without the president. flip through your Constitution. You should all have your pocket constitutions. Flip through the Constitution. Look through Article 2 and see if you can find the Department of Justice. See if you can find the FBI. They don't exist. The president is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. He delegates his authority to those agencies created by Congress to assist him in carrying out his constitutional obligation to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. So the powers that the FBI and the Department of Justice have derive from the power of the president, and the president is in charge of them all. So it's the president's job to ensure that Joe Biden, when he was the former vice president and he was in Ukraine, and he had $1 billion in his back pocket of U.S. taxpayer dollars that he was required by Congress to give to the Ukrainians, it's President Trump's job to ensure that Biden did not commit a crime when he threatened to withhold the $1 billion if the president of Ukraine did not fire its chief prosecutor, who was at that time investigating Burisma Holdings and Hunter Biden, its director on the board of directors, for corruption. Trump would be violating his oath of office. He takes an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution. The Constitution requires the president, imposes a duty upon him to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. If the president refused to encourage, request that the Ukrainian government assist him in investigating credible allegations of corruption involving Joe Biden as former vice president, the president, President Trump, would be violating his oath of office. That would be something that Nancy Pelosi could impeach him for if it's considered such an abuse of office that it rises to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor. So President Trump, in his call to the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden based upon these very credible allegations of corruption, is not a crime. It's not bribery, not extortion, not campaign finance violations, not a crime under U.S. law. And in fact, it's a requirement. It's a duty, an obligation that President Trump do so. More about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to The Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show here on WHP 580 News Talk Radio and iHeartRadio. And we're glad to have you back here. This is the place on the dial where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we were talking in the last segment about how it's the president's constitutional duty and obligation to ensure that our federal laws are faithfully carried out and executed. He's actually obligated by the Constitution to investigate and if there's probable cause, prosecute former Vice President Joe Biden for very credible allegations of corruption in Ukraine. You know, what's the evidence? Well, just get on YouTube, and you can YouTube Joe Biden at that Council on Foreign Relations conference where he is basically, it's all an admission. It's all going to be admitted into evidence, right? Admissions are not hearsay. You'll get an admission by your party opponent into evidence. And so you can just run the YouTube. You can just put up a little video recorder or a little television and run YouTube or your laptop, and you'll have Joe Biden talking about how he threatened to withhold $1 billion from the government of Ukraine if it didn't fire its chief prosecutor, who at the time, by the way, Joe left this important detail out, who at the time happened to be investigating Joe Biden's son Hunter and Burisma Holdings, the company that Hunter Biden sat on the board of directors for corruption. And in fact, the prosecutor was scheduled to interview Hunter Biden, right before he was fired. There's a lot of smoke there, wouldn't you say so, Art? And where there's smoke, there's fire.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, that's what we always say. So let's just hope that President Zelensky cooperates with President Trump and the U.S. Department of Justice, and we get to the bottom of this. But in the meantime, our friends in the Democratic Party and over in the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives are not happy with our dear president, not happy at all, and they are pulling out all of the stops to do whatever they can to prevent this president not only from carrying out foreign policy, but from carrying out his constitutional obligation to enforce the law. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's announcement, and I'm sure all of you saw it. It's the biggest news story of the month, or maybe even the year. The press conference that she held there in the halls of Congress. She had all the U.S. flags behind her, and it looked very grave. She looked very sincere. This was a big deal. Her press conference announcement of an official impeachment inquiry, and I'm using air quotes for that, official impeachment inquiry, end quote. Keep that in mind. We're going to get back to that. To be undertaken by the United States House of Representatives is a facade. There's nothing behind it. Pelosi called a news conference to make her big announcement, and after spending a few minutes quoting our founding fathers, extolling the virtues of the United States Constitution and the importance of our national security, and then declaring that President Trump is, of course, subverting all of those things, Pelosi finally got to her point, and I quote, "Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry," end quote. Remember, official impeachment inquiry. What is that? Wow. Well, so one would think, after listening to Pelosi make that bold statement, that the House is what? Impeaching the president. This is historic. And how many times did we hear Jack Taper and the rest on CNN and MSNBC say this is historic? This is the third impeachment. This is the impeachment of the third president of the United States. We had Andrew Johnson. We have Bill Clinton. And now we have President Donald Trump being impeached. We heard that over and over and over again. That's a lie. The president is not being impeached. In her very next sentence, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said, "And I am directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under the umbrella of impeachment inquiry." What is that? What does that even mean? What is this about umbrellas? Does the Constitution talk about umbrellas? This is a farce. That's it. With the entire nation watching, Pelosi stepped up to the television cameras and boldly announced that the House committees should, well, continue doing what they're doing. Well, contrary to Pelosi's implication, they're not impeaching the president. In order to formally initiate an impeachment inquiry, which is just another word or a softer word for investigation, the House of Representatives must pass a resolution or a bill setting forth the various charges which they believe present a case for impeachment. It's similar to a grand jury indictment. The prosecutor goes into the grand jury room and presents a bill of charges to the grand jury, and the grand jury decides whether to indict. None of that has happened here. A news conference is not a bill of impeachment. Rhetoric, even rhetoric from the lovely Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is not legal process. You can't speak an impeachment into existence. You have to do what legislators are supposed to do. You sit down at your desk, you take out a pencil or a pen, and you write a bill. And in the bill you say, these are the things we believe President Trump did wrong. Therefore, we call for the impeachment of a president. I mean, you can do it in 1 or 2 sentences, Art. I mean, it's not that difficult. And then you take that bill and you move it through Capitol Hill. Remember PBS and I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill? Remember, maybe we should get that back and have that as a lesson to Nancy Pelosi and our friends in the Democratic Party on how to write a bill. Because you can't impeach without a bill being passed by a majority of the House. So there's where Nancy Pelosi is misleading the American people. It's a fraud. Let's just go through and let's take Nancy Pelosi and let's just assume that she has written a bill or a resolution calling for impeachment. What would the charges be? Well, we have to go back to her press conference where she lays out these rhetorical charges. They're not legal charges. They're not in any bill. They're not in any indictment. They're not in any resolution for impeachment. They're rhetorical. She just speaks them into existence. Well, Pelosi laid out a case against the president. She said, and here's her case, quote, press reports began to break of a phone call by the President of the United States calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election. And listen to the next sentence. This is a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. Did I say foreign election? No, she didn't say foreign. Let me reread her statement so I get it right. Nancy Pelosi said at her press conference. Now here she is laying out the charges for this official impeachment inquiry, which is not a thing. She said press reports began to break of a phone call by the President of the United States calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election. This is a breach of his, she means Trump's, constitutional responsibilities. Now, first of all, the statement is false. The president did not request that Ukraine intervene in President Trump's election. It's categorically, patently a false statement to make. But before we even get to that false statement, listen to how she begins her charge against the president. Press reports began to break. Press reports. So she's looking at CNN. She's listening to Jack Taper or Chris Cuomo on CNN, and they are breathlessly talking about reports about this phone call. So she goes from watching CNN and to the little podium where she delivers a press conference, and that's how she begins this official impeachment inquiry from what she just saw on CNN. Is this the United States of America? Is this the constitutional republic that our founding fathers bestowed upon us? This is it. Nancy Pelosi calling for an official impeachment inquiry, which doesn't exist, on the basis of press reports. Anyway, Trump requesting that a foreign government investigate credible allegations of corruption involving former Vice President Joe Biden is not an intervention in the president's election or a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. We've already discussed how the president, as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States of America, is obligated by the Constitution to take care that the laws of this country are faithfully executed. If he has reason to believe, credible evidence, probable cause, that Joe Biden committed a crime in Ukraine with his ordering of the firing of the chief prosecutor to benefit his own son, the president must investigate. It's his obligation under the Constitution. More about the Trump-Zelensky phone call and Nancy Pelosi's fake official impeachment inquiry when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to The Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And I am delivering on our promise here The show promises to give you the important political and legal issues of the day, and I think this is probably the most important political/legal issue of the day, if not the year. We have our Democratic friends and our friends in the media making these bold announcements that we have an historic event before us. We have the third time in the history of the United States of America that a sitting president is being impeached. We hear a lot about Andrew Johnson. We hear a lot about Bill Clinton, and now how Donald J. Trump is the third president subject to impeachment in American history. That is completely false. That is a false statement. President Trump is not being impeached. We have the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, take to the podium in that beautiful, remarkable way that she stumbles and mutters and hems and haws and her dentures almost fall out. She makes this announcement of this official impeachment inquiry that is not an impeachment at all. And we're talking about, and Art and I were talking about how maybe Nancy Pelosi needs to watch that PBS video of I'm Just a Bill sitting on Capitol Hill to learn how one brings an official impeachment inquiry. It's not by holding a press conference. It's not by uttering it. You cannot utter it into existence. You have to write a bill. You have to write a bill, and you have to lay out the charges for impeachment. And then you got to go around to your fellow congressmen and congresswomen, and you got to say, hey, would you vote for this bill? And if you get a majority of them to vote in favor of it, boom, you've got an official impeachment inquiry. But that's not what happened here. And then we're listening to Pelosi's press conference, and we're just assuming for the sake of argument that she has an impeachment bill, and we're going through what the charges would be. There's no written document there's no legal document for us to read where the charges would have to be. So we have to just figure out, well, what would Nancy Pelosi charge in her impeachment bill? Well, let's listen to see what she says during her press conference where she lays out her case. And when she first started to lay out her case, she talked about how press reports began to circulate. So we've got Nancy Pelosi watching CNN talking about this horrible, devious call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. Nancy Pelosi turns off the TV, runs down the hallway, and announces an official impeachment inquiry. And that's actually pretty pathetic if you think about it. I mean, she is an elected member of the United States Congress. She is one of the highest-ranking elected officials in the United States of America. She is in the line of succession to become president of the United States. And she calls an official impeachment inquiry because of what she watches on television. So, and we're going through these charges, and every time Pelosi or the Democrats say there's evidence that the president was calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election, is patently false. And by the way, there is no election between Joe Biden and President Trump. Joe Biden's running in an election being convened by the Democratic Party of the United States. The Democratic Party has their own primary election going on. The election is between Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and the rest. That's the election that Joe Biden's in. Donald Trump is in a different election. Donald Trump is in an election for the nomination by his Republican Party in its primary election. Donald Trump is running against Governor Bill Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, the former governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, and a former congressman. I forget his name. He's the guy who yelled out at Barack Obama during the during the State of the Union address. I forget his name. Maybe Art remembers his name. But those are the three candidates in the election that Donald Trump is running in. So for Nancy Pelosi to say that Donald Trump is requesting that Ukraine intervene in his election is false. It's another of many falsehoods uttered by the Speaker of the House. And Trump requesting that a foreign government investigate credible allegations of corruption involving former Vice President Joe Biden, again, that's not an intervention in his election or a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. On the contrary, as we've discussed quite a bit so far in the show, the president is carrying out his constitutional duties to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Remember, Biden himself admitted that he threatened to pull $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer aid from Ukraine unless it fired the chief prosecutor who was investigating his son Hunter at the time.
That was Joe Wilson, by the way, Mark.
Oh, Joe Wilson from California, right? Congressman Joe Wilson. He's not a congressman anymore. But thank you, Art, for that great editorial comment there. And knowing this, when a president knows that there are credible allegations that a crime has been committed by a U.S. citizen, the president is required to investigate. He's required to investigate whether the Biden has violated U.S. law. That's the president's job as our chief law enforcement officer. It's irrelevant if Biden hopes to run for president against Trump. As I said before, Joe Biden does not get a get-out-of-jail-free card because he's a political opponent of the president. Now, Pelosi also stated during this press conference where she tried to utter into existence an official impeachment inquiry, which is legally inoperative. It doesn't work that way. She also stated that the U.S. intelligence community, the Inspector General, informed the House Intelligence Committee that the acting director of national intelligence blocked him from disclosing the whistleblower complaint. This is a violation of the law, according to Nancy Pelosi. And here, Pelosi might be technically correct. The acting director, and you heard him testify before the House Intelligence Committee yesterday, a couple of days ago, the acting director may have violated the whistleblower statute. He did not forward the complaint to the congressional committees by the deadline. But he had good reason. The Justice Department stopped him. It was concerned the complaint did not satisfy the statutory requirements and contained classified information subject to executive privilege. Now, nevertheless, the Trump administration later agreed to waive executive privilege and provide the complaint. This brief delay in providing the whistleblower complaint to Congress is not a crime, let alone a high crime and misdemeanor of the kind envisioned by the framers of our Constitution. And that's what you need in order to impeach and convict under an impeachment bill. Now, later in her remarks, Pelosi said, and this week the president has admitted to asking the president of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit Trump politically. And she calls that a betrayal of the president's oath of office. And that's absurd. As I've previously explained, the president is carrying out his oath of office by investigating the Bidens for corruption. And how about most everything an elected official does? He does in part to benefit himself politically. Speaker Pelosi, for example, announced this impeachment inquiry not because she wanted to. She doesn't believe she has the votes for it. Otherwise, she would have introduced a bill. She did it to benefit herself politically. She needs to placate the more extremist wing of her Democratic Party, led by the Squad, Ilhan Omar, and the others who are demanding Trump's immediate impeachment. So how does Nancy Pelosi, who, by the way, is an elected Speaker of the House, she has to have enough votes to continue to be Speaker. She announced this official impeachment inquiry to benefit herself politically. That's what elected officials do. All right, so where are we? In short, this is what you need to know. Nancy Pelosi's impeachment inquiry is a fraud. She hasn't done what she claims. But what she is doing is damaging the presidency. With her threats to impeach, she caused the president to release a transcript of his telephone call with the Ukrainian president, which, although it exonerates Trump of any wrongdoing, it jeopardizes his ability to conduct foreign policy. Now the president and every foreign leader with whom he speaks will be reluctant to talk openly and candidly about the issues of national importance out of fear the contents of their call, well, they'll appear on the front page of the New York Times, just like the contents of the call between Trump and Zelensky did. It's Pelosi who's violating her oath of office to defend the Constitution. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, she's usurping the president's constitutional duty to conduct foreign policy, and she's trying to interfere in his effort to enforce U.S. law. Well, that's about all the time we have today for the Mark Scaringi Show. I want to thank you for tuning in and listening. Tune in every Saturday at 1 o'clock. Thank you.